The morning the fence disappeared, everything changed. Not just the property line, but the balance between two neighbors who had quietly tolerated each other for years. Where there had once been a clear boundary, there was now open space and a message that didn't need words. They didn't ask, they didn't warn, they just tore it out and carried on like it never mattered. At first, it looked like a simple mistake, maybe a contractor's oversight. But the way they kept building, inch by inch, like they owned more than they should, that's when it stopped being an accident. And that's when a quiet decision was made. Because if they were willing to erase the line that easily, then maybe it was time to show them exactly how much that line was worth. But the real question is, how far would you go to make someone regret crossing it?
Before the fence came down, life in that neighborhood followed a quiet, predictable rhythm. It was the kind of place where mornings started slow, with sunlight stretching across neatly cut lawns and the distant hum of routine. Sprinklers ticking, cars pulling out for work, doors closing with soft finality. Nothing felt rushed, and nothing ever seemed out of place. For years, it had been that way. The homeowner had chosen that neighborhood for exactly that reason. It wasn't perfect, but it was stable. The rules were clear, the properties were well kept, and most people respected the unspoken boundaries that made living there easy. There was comfort in knowing where one yard ended and another began. Comfort in structure, in predictability, in the simple idea that everyone understood the limits. That boundary fence wasn't just wood and nails. It had been there long before, quietly marking the line without ever needing attention. No disputes, no arguments, no reason to question it. It was just there, solid, dependable, almost invisible in how normal it felt. And for a long time, the neighbors on the other side didn't stand out either. They kept to themselves at first. No unnecessary noise, no obvious problems. Just another household blending into the background. The kind of presence you barely notice, which in that neighborhood was exactly how things were supposed to be. But then, things started to shift. It began small, subtle enough to ignore. A few construction materials showing up near the edge of the property, equipment parked just a little too close to the fence line, the faint sounds of planning, measuring, marking. At first, it felt temporary, like any short renovation project that would come and go without changing anything important. Except it didn't go away. The activity picked up instead. Workers came earlier, the sounds grew louder, and slowly, almost deliberately, the space around that boundary started to feel different. Not broken, not obviously crossed, but unsettled, like something was being tested, piece by piece, to see how far it could go without being challenged. There was no direct confrontation. No one knocked on the door, no one explained what was happening. Everything stayed just within that uncomfortable gray area where it wasn't quite enough to react to, but just enough to notice. And that's what made it hard to ignore. Because when something changes that gradually, you start questioning yourself before you question anyone else. Maybe it's nothing, maybe it's temporary, maybe it'll fix itself. But deep down, there's always that quiet feeling that something isn't right. The fence still stood at that point, still marked the line, still held its place like it always had. But for the first time, it didn't feel permanent anymore. And once that feeling sets in, it doesn't go away. The day the fence disappeared didn't start with noise or warning. It started with absence. Where there had once been a clear boundary, there was now nothing but open ground, and a line that suddenly felt negotiable. The work next door didn't pause, it accelerated. Crews moved with confidence, measuring, digging, laying foundations as if that invisible line had already been agreed upon. At first, it seemed like something that could be corrected, a mistake, a quick conversation. But before that could even happen, a letter arrived. Not from the neighbor, from the HOA. A formal notice, printed and precise, outlining a violation.
According to their records, the property boundary had always been slightly different than assumed. The fence, it claimed, had been placed incorrectly years ago, and now, with the renovation underway, that error was being corrected. It didn't make sense. The fence had stood for years without question. No disputes, no surveys, no complaints. But suddenly there were documents, diagrams, authority, and with it came something else: pressure. Another letter followed, then another. Warnings turned into fines, small at first, almost dismissible, but they kept coming, each one backed with language that made it clear this wasn't optional. Adjustments needed to be made, compliance was expected, and every day that passed without action, the cost grew. Meanwhile, next door, the construction didn't just continue, it expanded. The foundation stretched closer than it should have. Materials spilled into space that once felt secure. Workers moved freely, as if the line had already been erased, not just physically, but legally. And every attempt to question it led back to the same place, the HOA. They had already decided. Calls were made, emails sent, evidence gathered, old photos, past records, anything that could prove what always been obvious. But every response came back colder, more distant. Policies were cited, clauses referenced, technicalities used like shields. It wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a system closing ranks. And then came the inspection, an official visit scheduled without flexibility, carried out with quiet authority. Measurements were taken, notes were written, and by the end of it, the outcome felt predetermined. Another notice followed shortly after, more severe this time. The language had changed, the tone had hardened. Compliance wasn't just expected anymore, it was demanded. The fines increased, deadlines tightened, and the weight of it all started to press in from every direction. Fix the issue, they insisted. Accept the adjustment. Move forward. But moving forward meant something very different now. It meant accepting that the boundary had shifted, that the space once protected was no longer secure, that years of quiet certainty could be undone by paperwork and timing. And next door, the structure kept rising, faster now, taller, more permanent with every passing day. Because the longer it stood, the harder it would be to challenge. That realization changed everything. This wasn't about correcting a mistake. It was about setting something in place before anyone could stop it. And every delay, every unanswered message, every fine, it all served the same purpose: run out the clock. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for, because while the pressure was building from their side, something else was building quietly on the other, and it wasn't going to follow their timeline.
The breaking point didn't come quietly. It came all at once. Another notice arrived, final, stamped, and impossible to ignore. The fines had reached a level that no longer felt like pressure. It felt like punishment. A deadline was set, sharp and immovable. Comply or face legal escalation. And right on schedule, the structure next door reached its final phase. Concrete had been poured, framework locked in. What once felt temporary now stood heavy and permanent, stretching into space that had never belonged to it. It wasn't just a renovation anymore. It was a statement. But that was the moment everything shifted. Because while they had been building outward, something else had been building quietly behind the scenes. Every ignored message, every fine, every rushed construction decision, it had all been documented, preserved, and aligned. And then, without warning, everything stopped. Not gradually, not hesitantly, completely. The site went silent, tools left untouched, workers gone. A notice appeared where progress once stood, but this one didn't come from the HOA. It came from a higher authority, backed by records they hadn't expected anyone to have. The boundary they had claimed wasn't theirs. The approvals they had relied on weren't valid, and the structure they had rushed to complete
now sat directly in violation of something far more serious than HOA guidelines. What followed wasn't a conversation, it was exposure. Meetings were called, documents were pulled, and for the first time, the same system that had applied pressure so effortlessly turned its attention in the opposite direction. Every shortcut, every assumption, every overreach, it all surfaced at once. The confidence that had driven everything forward began to collapse under its own weight. Because this time, there was no gray area left to hide in, only consequences. And as the realization settled in, one thing became painfully clear. The line they had tried to erase had just been redrawn in a way they couldn't ignore. In the days that followed, the silence said everything. The construction site that once moved with urgency now stood frozen, wrapped in uncertainty. What had been built so quickly, so confidently, was no longer progress, it was a liability. Orders came through, firm and final. Work couldn't continue. Portions of the structure had to be reviewed, adjusted, and in some cases, completely undone. And the responsibility didn't fall quietly. The same confidence that once pushed boundaries forward had vanished. In its place came delays, mounting costs, and a level of scrutiny that no one had planned for. What was meant to be a smooth renovation turned into a drawn-out process filled with corrections, approvals, and consequences that stretched far beyond the original timeline. The HOA, once so quick to enforce, grew noticeably cautious. Their tone shifted. The notices stopped. The pressure disappeared as quickly as it had arrived. Because now, every decision they made carried weight, and every oversight had already been exposed. As for the homeowner, nothing outwardly dramatic changed. No celebrations, no loud victories, just something quieter, something stronger. The boundary was restored, not just physically, but with clarity that couldn't be questioned again. What had once been uncertain now was backed by records, authority, and a line that no one would dare test twice. And in the end, that's what mattered most. Because this was never just about a fence. It was about what happens when someone assumes they can take more than what's theirs, and what it costs when they're proven wrong. Some people think boundaries are just lines on the ground, but sometimes they're the only thing standing between order and chaos. So the real question is, when someone crosses yours, do you let it slide, or do you make sure they never try it again?